All right. Welcome to our December meeting of our Task Force for Achieving Academic Equity and Excellence for Black Boys. Just a reminder to our task force members that we are streaming live to the public. This is in order for everyone to be able to just see the wonderful things that we are doing in order to help our Black boys and young men in not Prince George, just all the counties in Maryland State Public Schools. Just a few announcements. First of all, we have meetings coming up in December for the facilitators, meeting next Tuesday. And then task force, our next meeting will be January 7th, Thursday, January 7th. In the new year, we'll say, sadly, goodbye to 2020. To 2020 and into our new year. Everyone should have received, and I want to thank Dr. Simpson again and Ms. Charlene Necessary for sending out this guide. This is nowhere where we want to go with our report, but it does give a general template of how we want our final report to the board to look. It is from the U.S. Department of Education. It's called the What Works Guide, and they do a number of these for different topics. So the key thing is that we want, if everyone could please mute their mics. Thank you. We want to make sure that what we offer to our pilot schools and also to all of our schools in Maryland is a how-to guide, a nice, detailed set of recommendations, and also some strategies as to how they can implement those recommendations. In addition, study group 1 was sent 2 documents from CASEL that talked about special and effective social and emotional learning programs for preschool and elementary and middle and high school. Again, copied and sent out by Dr. Simpson and Mrs. Necessary for study group 1 for your reference. So hopefully everyone received that. If you didn't, please let me know and we'll make sure that we get you a hard copy, but you are able to access it online as well. We want to welcome some additional, one additional principal to our task force, Mrs. Lori Austin, principal at Wall Chapel Elementary School in Anne Arundel County. She joins Dr. Melinda Johnson in Charles County, Mrs. Crystal Chambers in Queen Anne's County, Mrs. Glenice Marshall in Prince George's County, and our own Mrs. Diane Roberts from Charles County, as well as principals who are interested in piloting the recommendations that our task force will be recommending to the school board. Also, I want to recognize and thank President Clarence Crawford, our state board president, for being with us today. President Crawford has been one of our greatest advocates, and he has been closely monitoring our activities. And up to now, I can say that he's been pleased with our progress. Right, President Crawford? Give me a thumbs up. All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Also, I have an announcement to make, and I have to apologize because I didn't notice that when she sent me an email, I saw that her title had changed. I want to recognize Mrs. Inez Claggett, who is now the school board president for Calvert County. Welcome, and congratulations, Mrs. Claggett. All right, so we are going up in the world in status here with our task force members. Wonderful, wonderful. All right, do we have any guests from our school board? I don't see anyone. Okay, all right. And then we also have with us, and I'll be saying more about them, Dr. Dara Shaw, who'll be presenting information, data that the study groups have requested from her. And I want to thank Dr. Shaw. She's been wonderful at responding to our requests for research and data. And also we have Ms. Denise Ide from Logic of English, and I'll be saying more about Mrs. Ide later on. All right, hopefully I didn't forget anyone. All right, then we're ready to start because I don't want to linger. I want to thank the study group facilitators and also the study group members for being so patient with me. This was supposed to be a completely study group work session, but I wanted us definitely to hear from Dr. Shaw and also from Mrs. Ide. So I'm thank you that you were bearing with me, and we'll be starting our study groups a little bit later on this morning. All right, without further ado, Dr. Shaw, I'm going to turn things over to you. If you could please just explain the data that was requested and also explain to us about how this would apply to what we're doing in our task force. And also in regards to questions, both Dr. Shaw and Ms. Ide have said that they will be visiting the study groups. So hopefully study group facilitators that you have sent them your breakout links, because they will be coming to your study groups and will be able to answer any questions that you have on their presentations. All right, Dr. Shaw, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Greene, and thank you to the task force for having me back once again. As Dr. Greene said, my name is Dara Shaw. I am the Executive Director for the Office of Research here at MSDE. We serve a bunch of primary functions, but the two that I'm going to touch on today is number one, we look at Maryland data and analyze Maryland data to answer questions about what's going on in Maryland and whether or not programs are working in Maryland. So that's what I'm here to talk to you today about. We had a request from one of the study groups, and the others were interested in looking at some data on performance on student outcomes in Maryland. So that's what I'm here today to talk to you about. But the other function, one of the other functions that my office here at MSDE does is we are able to discover and analyze and pull together peer-reviewed, rigorous research on pretty much any topic that you can imagine. And that's been another request of the task force from one of the study groups, which is coming down the line in a couple of meetings. So today I'm really going to focus on data. The request was, in general, to take a look at, number one, the way that African-American male students in Maryland are performing on a bunch of different measures. So academic measures like test scores, graduation rate, some non-academic measures like attendance or discipline or identification for, my lights just went off in the office. If you don't move, the lights go off. There we go. It thinks that I'm not here. So the first question was, how are African American students doing today on a number of these important student measures? The second question is, how are African American male students, how have they been doing over time on a number of these measures? We know that there is much room for improvement and growth among these students, but have they been showing improvement and growth over time? And then the third question is, how are African American male students doing compared to other student groups in the state? Are we talking about large or small gaps? So hopefully some of this data will help inform the questions that you guys are asking, and also the areas where you want to focus. If you see an area where the trend line is going up and has been going steadily up over the past few years, that might be less of an area of focus than an area where the trend line has been going down steadily for the past few years. So, understanding that there are of course, you want to address everything in a report, but understanding that there are the realities of limited time and limited resources, some of this data might help you prioritize where you'd like to focus as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully. So what I don't love about this is that as soon as I put this up on my screen, I can't see you anymore. But is that coming through all right? Can someone, oh, I can see. Okay, there we go.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to show to you is disaggregated data on some student outcomes. This is all data, no words. So if you're a math person like me, I like to, I mean, it's not a joke, but I like to say that if when I come and talk about data and statistics, if it's because, if I sound like a math teacher, it's because I was a math teacher. I was a high school statistics teacher in Washington, D.C. So if it sounds like statistics class, it's because we can blame my training or thank my training in that case. Okay, so the first piece of information that I'm going to show you is academic achievement as measured by our state standardized test, which is the PARCC test. Every student in grades 3 through 8 takes this test every year, put aside the COVID year. But every student in grades 3 through 8 takes a test each year in English language arts and in math. Students also test once in high school. In English language arts, they usually do that in the 10th grade. And in math, they usually do that when it comes time to take algebra, whenever that is for the student. So sometimes it's 9th grade, sometimes it's later, sometimes it's earlier, actually. But those are the measures that I'm going to show you is student performance on our state standardized tests in English language arts on this slide, and then math on the next slide. Now, this test called the PARCC test, it was called the PARCC test. We're moving on to a different name, but in the past, it's called the PARCC test. These tests are scored on 5 performance levels, levels 1 through 5. Levels 4 and 5 are considered proficient. Levels 1, 2, and 3 are considered not proficient in the subject. So what I am showing you here is the percent of students who have scored proficient or higher, level 4 or level 5, on those state standardized tests. Now, the measurement is going to carry through on every single slide, which is the blue line, or the red line, sorry, is African American males, male students. The blue line is African American female students, and the green line is everybody else. Now, there's a reason why I'm showing you these 3 groups, and it'll actually become a lot more apparent on the next slide. But so what you're looking at here, we always need to have a comparison. So for every single slide, the red line is African American male students, the blue line is African American female students, and the green line is everybody else. So both genders and basically any student who is not African American in both genders. So as you can see on the left-hand side, in English language arts in our elementary and middle grades, African American males in 2019, 21% of them scored proficient on the state standardized test in English language arts. Compare that to African American females, 36% of them scored proficient on the state standardized test. And for everybody else, 51% of them scored proficient on the state standardized test. So what I want you to notice, the first thing that I want you to notice in this graph are those 3 gaps. The second thing that I want you to notice in this graph is that the trend is going up. So it's going up in small numbers. But in 2015, for African American males, only 16% were proficient. And by the time we get to 2019, 21% are proficient. Now, that seems like a small amount, but I would like to preface that by saying that in the world of testing, a 1% gain each year is considered pretty steady progress, and a 2% gain is considered a lot. And I know that seems like a really small amount compared to the amount of progress that needs to be made, but this needle is historically very slow to move. So just to give you some context, 2%, a 2% gain from 2018 to 2019 is obviously highly inadequate when it comes to closing an achievement gap here. But I also want to put some historical context for you so that you can understand what to expect when it comes to progress. So that trend for African American males has been going up for the past 5 years, but as you can see, there is still a significant gap between African American male students in the red line and all other students in the green line. The right-hand graph shows pretty much the same thing, except a significantly better trend line. Again, the red line is still significantly below the green line, but over the past 5 years, the percent of students who are proficient has increased from 17% to 31%. Now, compare that. That was English language arts. This is math. In math, African American male and female students perform about the same. I'm going to go back to English language arts for a second. In English language arts, male and female students do not perform the same. So now you're looking at the blue line, which is the female students, and the red line, which is the male students. So the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is, again, when you're writing your report, it would help to say, to be very specific about where you want to put the intervention. So here, whatever intervention is necessary, it needs to be able to target both male and female students, because there isn't really that much of a gender gap here. The difference here, the gap here is in student race ethnicity. The green line and then the red and the blue lines are right next to each other for gender. Compare that to English language arts, where the gap is both gender and race based. Where not only are African American students performing significantly below all other students, but the male students are also performing significantly below the female students. That's why I'm showing you both male and female students here. Because in some cases, there is a gender gap, but in some cases, there isn't. And the gap is more more related to race than it is to gender. So with English language arts, here there is a gender gap. With math, here, there is not a significant gender gap. The gap is mostly related to race. So on the left, you see math grades 3 through 8, and on the right, you see algebra 1. Okay. More academic achievement. I would not, these data were requested, but I would not put too much stock, as much import in these data as the previous data, because remember, those state standardized tests, every student in the state takes them. For advanced placement tests, these are, and SATs, these are selective. And so it's not, there's still obviously a gap here, but I wouldn't pay too much attention to the trend, because it could have been that just a whole bunch of kids came in one year and decided to take tests, especially SAT, or not take tests. But I'm showing it to you anyway, again, because you can see a clear gap. But in this case, as with math, the gap is not a gender gap. So on the left-hand side, you see the average advanced placement score. That score is from 1 to 5. For African American male and female students, they tend to score an average of about 2.4 on their tests. And again, you see the trend is going up slowly, but it is going up. No real gender gap there, but there is a gap between African American students and all other students. The average score for those students is a 3.3. Same thing for SAT, not really a gender gap. The red and the blue lines are right next to each other, but below the green line. Okay, let's talk about something other than test scores. You probably already knew that there is a substantial gender gap in high school graduation. And this shows it to you fairly clearly. In fact, the 4-year graduation rate, which is on the left, for African American females is just about the same as it is for everybody else. The blue line and the green line in the last 3 years are just about on top of each other. For African American male students, however, you can see that it's significantly below. I do, again, though, want to draw your attention to the very sharp upward trend here for African American students over the past 10 years. So the green line, the graduation rate for all other students has remained fairly flat, right? It's been in the high 80s for the last 10 years. The high school graduation rate for African American male students over the last 10 years has gone up from 66% to 81% over the last 10 years. So there is, yes, there is still a clear gap. But again, this is an example of, I'm here. My lights keep going on. My office doesn't believe that I'm sitting here. This is a clear example of interventions that have been taking place over the last 10 years that have been successful. And so again, if you're trying to focus on where to implement new programs versus where to support existing programs, this seems to say existing programs are to a degree successful. So let's keep on pushing on those because the trend has been going up. On the right-hand side, you see 5-year graduation rate. Shows basically the same thing. Huge gender gap. African-American female students in the past few years are graduating at the same rates as everybody else. African-American male students are not. Okay, let's talk about attendance. This one is interesting because the left-hand side shows the average attendance rate for students in grades K to 8. And the right-hand side shows the average attendance rate for students in high school. Again, there's not that much of a gender gap. So the red line and the blue line are pretty similar to each other. And you can see on the left that there's also not that large of an attendance gap for students in grades K through 8. But there is a much larger gap for students in high school. And so again, if you're thinking about where do we focus our efforts as opposed to attendance, it seems from these data that it is the high school students. First of all, their attendance is lower to begin with. These two graphs are on the same scale. So in 2000, we do have data for COVID here. So for 2020, African American male students, their average daily attendance was 93% in elementary and middle school, but it's only 88.7% in high school. So these graphs are on the same scale. But again, the gap in elementary and middle school is there, but not particularly pronounced. It is much more pronounced in high school. All right, let's look at something else. How about suspensions and expulsions? In this case, you want the trend line to go down. In the other ones, you want the trend line to go up. But here, an improvement is going down. On the left-hand side, you see the percent of students suspended at least once in a given year. We do have data for 2020, so it's included here, but it basically stops in March. So you can pay attention to 2019 if you'd like. But what this is telling you is that in 2019, 8% of African American male students were suspended at least once that year. It doesn't mean that they were or weren't suspended in previous years. This is just that year. In the 2019 school year, 8% of African American students were suspended at least once. 5% of African American female students were suspended at least once, and 3% of all other students were suspended at least once. I showed you data that was similar to this a few months back. Again, you see that there is a significant gender gap. So the red line and the blue line is far apart. Male students are suspended at almost double the rate as female students for African American students. And then there is also a significant race gap here, that Black students are suspended at significantly higher rates than all other students. On the right-hand side, you see the percent of students expelled, which again is telling, but it's hard to tell from this graph because because the numbers are so small to begin with. But what this is telling you is that for 2019, 0.1% of African American females were suspended, and 3 times that number, 0.3% of African American males were expelled, So small numbers, but you see kind of the same thing as you see in the suspensions, which is that there is both a gender gap and a race gap here.
Is it possible I could ask a question?
Sure. Go
Looking
ahead.
at that other graph, the green line represents all other races.
Mm-hmm.
Do you all have that data disaggregated with Latino males versus white males? Is that information available?
We do. I didn't want to put too many lines on the graph. If you have a question about any one of these measures, I can answer it. So, for example, for student discipline, Hispanic students tend to be disciplined at the same rate as white students. For academic achievement, it's not quite the same, but they tend to be more similar to white students, the rates for white students, than for African American students. For academic achievement, Hispanic students tend to perform more similarly to African American students than they do to white students. So it depends on which the outcome is. But yeah, we do have that information. It's rolled up into these. So the green line is probably, off the top of my head, like 70%, made up of 70% white students, 20% Hispanic students, and 10% Asian or Pacific Islander or Native American students. So that green line is mostly white students, probably like 3/4 white students and 1/4 other races. All right, almost done. This is showing you the same thing as the suspension, same idea as the suspension slide. Oh, I did want to note, sorry, about the discipline. Again, this is an example of, yes, there is a clear gap, but also the trend has gone down significantly in the past 10 years. So again, there are efforts underway in every single one of these areas. Some of them are clearly more successful than others, but you look at the trend in the red line, and it's still not good. We don't want the red line to be higher than the rest of them, but the trend in the red line has gone down. Same thing for expulsions. Arrests, not so much. So these are physical arrests or referrals to law enforcement, what we call a paper arrest. Physical arrests or referrals to law enforcement for incidents on school property or an off-campus school activity. This is the number of incidences per 1,000 students. So for every 1,000 African American male students, there were 7.4 arrests. For every 1,000 African American female students, there were 4.3 arrests. For every 1,000 everybody else, there were 2.3 arrests. So again, here you see a big gender gap between the red line and the blue line, and also a race gap between the red, blue lines and the green. Okay, last one. This is the percent of students identified as a student with disabilities. And this number has been pretty steady over the last 5 years. What this is telling you is that of all, I'm going to the red line, of all African American male students, 19% of them have been identified in 2020 as a student with disability. Only 9% of African American female students are identified as students with disabilities, and that matches pretty much the rate for all other students. 10% of all other students have been identified as students with disabilities. I'm going to put this down for a second. There is one data point missing here. Oh, now I can see you again. Excellent. There was one data point that was requested of us that was not presented here, and I just want to draw your attention to that, which is the percent of students who are identified for gifted and talented education or gifted and talented services. That data point was seriously, come on, it's like every 5 minutes. And at least it gets me doing a little calisthenics in here. That data point was only identified for statewide data collection last year. So we don't have great data on that, and we only have 1 year of data on it, and so I don't have it to show you. If local school systems might have that information, but we don't have it here at MSD. So in case you were wondering why that was missing, that's why. Okay, that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions or distribute this in any way that you need to. By the way, all of this data that I just showed you, I made it into a PowerPoint presentation, but it's all public data and publicly accessible on mdreportcard.org. On mdreportcard.org, you can filter by student group. And so it can show you our state standardized test data. It can show you our attendance data. The arrest data I pulled from somewhere else, but it's also up there on our website. And you can filter everything by student group and by gender. And so none of the data that I'm showing you here is, a secret. Any member of the public can access this at any time. I know for the board members who are here, you've seen everything that's up there in one format or another at various board meetings. And so I just wanted to put that plug in to say that all of these data are accessible. And I love making slideshows. I'll put it in a fancy slideshow, and give that to you in whatever format that you want. But all these data are available and have been available, disaggregated by both race and gender.
All right.
I'll leave it at
that. Thank you. What I've asked Dr. Shaw to do, as well as our next guest, is they will be visiting your individual study groups. So I asked that you ask your questions at that time, just so that we can get through both presentations and be able to give you as much time as possible to meet with your team members. Dr. Shaw, thank you. Exquisitely done, as always. If you could send a copies of those PowerPoints to, I don't know if you prefer to sit, in fact, you should have the individual facilitators' email addresses. If you could send those to, and I would also like a copy as well.
Sure.
And also to Dr. Simpson, just in case anyone asks, Dr. Simpson would be able to send it out as well. Again, sure. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Thank you very much. All right, moving quickly to our next presentation. Her name is pronounced Ide. It's spelled E-I-D-E. I remember. Denise Ide is the president and founder of Logic of English, a mission-driven publisher that empowers students of all ages to become fluent readers and spellers. And you can see from our data that with our Black boys and young men, that is definitely has to be one of our focus points. Denise was born in Minnesota, and that's where she lives now. She was born to a single mom and a family that struggled with addiction. Denise is passionate about providing, and I can underline and put an exclamation point. Denise is passionate about providing all students access to evidence-based literacy education. When her son struggled to learn to read, Denise discovered that one of the core instructional tools used to help students with dyslexia, and I'm sure Dr. Melanie McCarthy, her ears just perked up. She found that the core instructional tools used to help students with dyslexia is to teach them how English really works. Upon seeing her own sons go from non-readers to reading chapter books within months, she decided to write Uncovering the Logic of English, an award-winning book about reading. She continues her life work of sharing the power of knowing how English works by speaking, writing, and publishing. I asked Ms. Ide to come to us today because our boys need to learn, and not just our boys, but all of our students need to do better with their reading. Our boys continue to be at the bottom of all races, continue to be at the bottom of scores, and there is a significant gender gap and racial gap with our Black boys. All right, so without further ado, Ms. Ide, it's all yours, and I think you have a slideshow to show us as well.
I do. Thank you for welcoming me to the task force. Today I want to share two things with you. One, I'm hoping to change how you see English and maybe even solve a question you have or two you might personally have about spelling. So this will be kind of a hands-on presentation that will hopefully, like I said, shift your view and understanding of English. And two, I want to connect that to education and outcomes, and I want to do that through stories. So I'm going to share a few stories that people have shared with me through the years to help maybe make a connection between the data that was so beautifully presented and what people experience. So with that in mind, and I too end up losing. Are you able to see me, everyone? All right, I have lost the presentation. There it is. Okay, I can see you and the presentation.
We see you, but we don't see the presentation, Ms. Ide.
Oh, really? All right, let's try this again. Do you see it now?
Yes, we see it now.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to talk about the science of reading today. And the science of reading is really an accumulation of information that we've learned about reading. I think many of you are familiar with one of these overviews of the research called the National Reading Panel that identified 5 essential skills for reading. And what's really exciting about this research is that the continued research has shown some amazing outcomes. Yesterday, I was on a training about the science of reading with the Reading League, and I just want to show you these numbers. They were explaining that numerous, like 12 or more studies, have now demonstrated that if you teach the science of reading for Tier 1, for your core instruction, 85% of students, and they were very clear, that is all students, can become proficient readers. So just think about those numbers. It's kind of stunning to think about. Another 10% can become proficient readers with intervention, leaving 5% in our struggling reader category, who will need ongoing intervention. Again, this was from the Science of Reading workshop that I was in yesterday, put on by the Reading League, and you can see that there are many studies through them that are demonstrating these numbers. So this is just to give us some hope of the sort of progress that could be made. So I would like to frame the science of reading with the simple view of reading. Now, I want to be clear, reading in and of itself is a complex skill, but it can be broken down to this equation. Oral language comprehension times decoding skills equals reading comprehension. In other words, this is a product. So if you have 0 decoding skills, you will not be able to pick up a book and read and comprehend it. However, if you have strong decoding skills, what this means is you'll be able to read and comprehend at the same level that you can listen and comprehend. So if you think about students and what they could listen and comprehend, strong decoding skills can unlock text that they could listen to and understand, which is an exciting goal. Now, the other thing that needs to be said here is that kids who can read well encounter more complex language and increase their vocabulary skills. So learning how to decode early is the key to increasing that oral and that other language comprehension skills as well. So it's very important that we teach decoding skills early. I want to take a moment to talk also about how the brain learns to read, beginning with speech development. When children are learning to speak, it's interesting. The first part of the brain that is activated is on the left side, and it's activated for the sounds of the language. As children as babies listen to the language, they begin to code in their brains the sounds of that language. And every language is coded in the same place, but every language has a different set of sounds. Now, as children learn to speak, they begin to develop neural connections between the sounds and the meaning of words. So this is going to come back with reading because we access the exact same area of the brain that we use for listening and comprehending as we do for reading and comprehending. And I'll show you how that works. But the foundational skill that students must learn right away in kindergarten or preschool is phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is the understanding that words are comprised of sounds. So that just means every word is made up of sounds and a combination of sounds. So I'm going to do a little hands-on workshop with you, and I'm going to begin by blending or segmenting a one-syllable word, and I would like you, wherever you are, to just blend that word together, because this is the foundational skill that is highly correlated with reading success. So the first word is d-a-g. Go ahead and say it aloud, or type it in the chat box, and it's a dog. But did you notice how I segmented the sounds apart? That skill of segmenting and blending has the highest correlation to reading of all the phonemic awareness skills. Let's try another one. T-e-n-t. It's a 10. All right, one more. This time I'm going to do a two-syllable word, and what I want you to notice is that blending that word together auditorily is a bit more challenging. That's because we need to be practicing phonemic awareness skills for multi-syllable words as well. So here it goes. P, p, n. Do you got it? It's a pumpkin. So we need to practice these skills of phonemic awareness for multi-syllable words because this is a foundational skill of reading. And you can kind of imagine how that connects back to what I showed you about how the brain learns the sounds. The second foundational skill of reading is systematic phonics. And this is the place where there's so much misunderstanding. And this is a place where I want to hopefully kind of shift how you think about English. Systematic phonics is an accurate written code which translates into a visual image. And I want to emphasize this word accurate. In a lot of blended literacy programs, we're teaching phonics that is inaccurate or incomplete, and then people ask us, why teach phonics, right? What's the point? There's so many exceptions in English. And in fact, one of the problems that we have in education is that teachers themselves don't know the answers to why words are spelled the way they are. When a student asks them, why is this word read that way? The most common answer is, that's an exception. The reason for this is because we teach an incomplete phonics, where A says as an apple, maybe A is in grapes, but it leaves ma, pa, water, call, all of those words as exceptions. Really, A says 3 sounds. Or we teach B says B as in butterfly, C says K as in carrot. You get the idea. We teach some phonics in balanced literacy programs, but we do not teach a complete phonics. Here's an example. This rule, hopefully many of you know, cap becomes cape, pet, Pete, rip, ripe, rob, robe when we add a silent final E. And so this is one rule that I'm going to come back to. So when we teach rules that are incomplete, this is what happens. I once took a whole set of level 1 readers. You would think that these would be easy, right, for emerging readers, such as Morris the Moose, and I analyzed the code in them. And here's what I found. If you learn the typical phonics that is taught to students in Morris the Moose, on page 1, there are 18 exceptions. 18 times where a parent or a student or a teacher is going to say to that child, that's an exception. It doesn't actually say that. Here, this Bob book, My School Trip, this one is a little bit better. There were 4 exceptions on page 1, but there was only 1 sentence. In fact, this one simple book used 89 of the 104 rules essential to explain the English language. And yet, most of our phonics knowledge leaves about half of those words as exceptions. So let's come back to this rule, cap becomes cape, pet, Pete, rip, ripe, rob, robe. Most schools teach the vowel says its long sound because of the E. And I want to make a point here that this is a really important rule. It explains half of silent final E words. But if this is the only rule you teach, what happens with a word like this? Well, people think it says have, and when a child misreads it as have, the teacher says that's an exception, and then we put it into a stack of sight words. In reality, there's a reason for a silent E in this word, and that is English words do not end in V. Did you know that? Every single time you hear V at the end of the word, you need to add a silent final E. And that solves words like have, give, solve, mauve, comprehensive, because English words don't end in V. Now, the interesting thing about this, whoops, I have the wrong slide right there, but the interesting thing about this is this rule explains 1,200 words in English that end in V. Now, most of us have just who read well or spell well have just somehow picked this up. It just doesn't look right. But when we know this rule, it explains 1,200 words. Here's an interesting fact. Human memory is limited to about 2,000 sight sound symbols. And when we ask children to memorize these exceptions, we're asking them to do a Herculean task. The average 5-year-old has about 10,000 words in their vocabulary. So if we teach them a phonics that leaves half of those words as exceptions, we are asking them to memorize 5,000 sight words. That is beyond the scope of the human mind's ability to memorize sight sound connections. So there's a better way. That's what I'm here to tell you. There's a hopeful, better way. So let's talk about English for a moment. How many letters are in the alphabet in English? Well, there are 26. If English is a phonetic language, it'd be important to know then how many sounds are in English. Just take a moment in the type box or in the chat box to type an answer or to answer that in your own mind. Did you know there are 45 sounds? By the way, I have spoken to thousands of teachers across the country, and teachers have no idea that there are 45 sounds in English. They're always surprised that there are more sounds than letters. So this is one of the challenges of the English language. We don't have a one-to-one correspondence as languages such as Finnish do. Instead, we have more sounds than we have letters. This means that we need to teach, instead of just the letters and their sounds, we need to teach what I call as phonograms or pictures of sounds. So let's look at phonograms a little bit more deeply. First of all, phonograms may be written with one letter, as in T, 2 letters, as in sh, 3 letters, as in I, or 4 letters, as in A. Also, phonograms may make more than one sound. So this phonogram, most of us have learned, says S, as in stand, sick, list, and hiss. However, that is the only sound most of us were taught. And so many kids misread is as is, or his as hiss. This phonogram actually says a second sound. It says Z. And it says this in many of the plurals. So some linguists have told me that this says Z 70% of the time. This is not an exception. It is how English works. So we need to teach right from the beginning. This phonogram says S and Z to eliminate confusion and to prevent guessing. Here's another example. This says ch, right? As in chin, choice, check, and cheek. And I remember sitting in first grade thinking, I have to learn how to spell the word school. That says stool. English is dumb. And by the way, when kids get English and I was kind of one of those natural readers, one of the 30% of kids who just kind of picked up reading. Those children tend to extrapolate and go, English is dumb. But when a student who struggles with reading sees this, they go, there's something wrong with me. But in reality, we're not teaching them the complete picture. So this also says, this is chenk. It also says ch as in chef, shoot, machine in Chicago. So what is going on here? Here's the interesting thing. If you've ever watched the Scripps Spelling Bee, you'll notice that these students get one clue when they get to spell words, and that is about origin. So these words where you hear the sound as in school, orchid, and chemistry, and chasm, this CH is the spelling for the Greek sound of k. These are all from Greek. So when those spelling student or contestants hear that that word has a Greek origin, they know that that's how this is spelled. They are not memorizing every word by rote. They understand how language works. Do you know the origin of the sound sh? This is from French. So once again, we can understand something and make connections, and we can learn that phonograms say more than one sound. So here's my first story. I was at a conference and I had my book, Uncovering the Logic of English, there. And this man named Jack, who was an engineer, picked up, bought the book, and the next day he came back, and I'm not joking, he was in tears. And he said to me, he said, I have always struggled with reading. And he said, here's the thing, based on how I learned in school, I always thought reading was about words. Now, this man had a successful career in engineering, and he went on to retire. And he went on to tell me this. He said, in my retirement, I now coach boys who are struggling. I go with my school district. And he said, as I was reading Uncovering the Logic of English, and he was reading, by the way, rules about how English works. That's what this book is about. He said, I had an aha moment. He said, every single one of the boys that I coach are struggling readers, and every single one of them are gearheads like me. He said, this is the key to their success. Again, I want to share with you the stories of the people who struggle and what they are saying would help them, because I think that helps us make the connection then to the data as well. Let's talk about spelling rules. So many of us have learned this rule, use I before E, except after C, and in neighbor and way. Now, this is the only spelling rule that most Americans think they know. But these are all the exceptions. So we wonder why we have a problem, right? It's because we were not taught an accurate understanding of the code of English. So I want to teach you a spelling rule that I hope will solve maybe one of your possible spelling questions. Let's begin with this. Most of us have learned that C says k as in cat. Did you also know it says s as in sent, center, sullen, absence? And when is it saying s in these words? Before an E. How about in circus, pencil, cinema, and cider? It's saying its s sound before an I. How about cylinder, cycle, cypress, spicy? It's saying s before a Y. Here's the thing, C always softens to s when followed by an E, I, or Y. What does it say before an A or a U as in cat, cop, and cut? It says k. How about before a consonant? Or at the end of the word, it says k. So here is the whole rule. C always softens to s when followed by an E, I, or Y. Otherwise, C says. Now, many people will show me a word like this, circus, and say English is crazy. See, the C says two sounds in this word. But why does it say the sounds at the beginning of the word? Because of the I. And how about in the middle? Because of the U. Did you know that this rule explains 6,000 words where C softens to S, and 10,000 words where it says k? Go back to the limits of human memory. This is the key to understanding how English words work, is the key to unlocking the code to read any word. And if you notice the words behind the screen here, many of these words are multi-syllable words. Many of these rules apply and unlock the bigger words of English. And what's exciting about that is that many kids plateau around 3rd or 4th grade as they hit academic content because they don't have the linguistic skills to decode these bigger words. This is also the key, by the way, to helping all students succeed. Another session I was in the last month, Dr. Susan Brady was talking about how one of the big problems is that when readers come into kindergarten or 1st grade, their parents will say, these kids don't need phonics. But when we teach reading, kids who come into school reading phonics, they are able to reach their full potential. Many of those kids by the end of 2nd grade will be reading at an 8th or 9th grade level. So those kids need this information. And this is the absolute key to unlocking the code for all of our struggling readers and helping them to reach their full potential. The data on this is super exciting. Now, let me maybe show you how this rule might help you. So we have the word picnic and we're adding the suffix ing. Have you ever wondered why on earth do we add a K? Some people even think the word picnicking looks a little strange. But what would this say without it? Do you see it? It would say picnic sing. So we need to add a K because C always softens to when followed by E, I, or Y. So that K is there so that it doesn't say picnic sing, it says picnicking. How about this word? Many people who are strong spellers naturally misspell the word garlic because they think the word garlicky looks funny. But why is there a K in it? Because what would this say? It would say garlic because that C always softens before an E or when followed by an E, I, or Y. So we need to add a K. So my purpose in showing you these is to help you understand that even strong readers and spellers benefit from this information. And this is the very key to unlocking the code for our struggling readers and spellers. This is the information that was shared at the beginning when we talked about my sons who struggled with reading. They learned information like this, and all of a sudden they could read and comprehend the chapter books that I had been reading aloud to them. I also want to share a story. One day, we got a phone call at our office, and this young man said he was from Los Angeles, and you could hear actually he was calling from out on the street on his cell phone, I think. And he said, I had a chance to watch your video, and the video was on YouTube, and it shared a bunch of my favorite rules about English. And he said, I'd like to tell you my story. And his story went like this. He said, I was so excited to go to kindergarten and to learn to read. And then in kindergarten, I didn't learn to read. And he said, and then I went to first grade and I was excited. This is going to be the year I'm going to learn to read. And he didn't learn to read. And then he was pulled out for intervention and he had hope that maybe this would be the time that he would learn to read. And he didn't learn to read. And he said, as the years went on, I just began to believe that I couldn't learn to read, that I was stupid. And he said, I got mixed up with the wrong crowd. And eventually I dropped out of high school and I ended up in prison. And he said, in prison, I had a religious experience and I decided, when I got out of prison, I was going to help kids. And he said, I then began part of a program where I would speak to kids in schools about why to stay in school. And he said, but here's the thing. Every time I stood up in front of kids about why to stay in school, I felt like I was just being a fake because I don't know how to read. And I was really touched by his story. And then I'm kidding you not. He said, and I saw your video. And do you know what? That rule, C softens to before E, I, and Y. Do you know how much that's going to help me? So again, I share this story because I want you to hear the voice of people who struggle and what they say makes a difference and helps unlock reading for them. Let's look at one more example from English. We have this ending shun. Many of you have probably learned it in school. I've discovered that it's taught nationwide, and it was taught to me. I've taught it prior to learning this, and it's found in words like invention, action, and function. But when you see the word confusion, do you feel a little confused? How about explosion? Mission? Okay, are you starting to have a little suspicion that something you were taught doesn't work? What is going on? This is one of my favorite phonograms. Did you know this says shh? Okay, that looks really weird to most of you, doesn't it? But it says shh. Did you know this also says shh? And here is the really big clincher. This says shh, and it says zh. So, by the way, this is the only way to spell zh in English. Most of us aren't even aware that zh is a sound, but in words like division, that's how it's spelled. Confusion, that's the spelling. And here's something else that's pretty cool. You can often, not always, look to the English root to find out which Latin spelling of sh to use. So face becomes facial. Why? Because face has a C in it. Space becomes spacious, once again, because of the root. Express becomes expression. confess, confession, locate, location. Do you see it? Do you see the patterns? Inspect, inspection. So here's my conclusion for you. English is a complex code. There are 75 phonograms and 31 spelling rules. So I would encourage you to really look at the curriculum that you are using to teach reading in your schools. Does it teach an accurate systematic phonics? And I want to be very careful. Logic of English is not the only company that does this. There are many companies who are teaching the accurate systematic phonics. That is the key to evaluate, are you teaching how English works? Because when you teach an accurate systematic phonics, you can explain 98% of English words. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? You'll be able to have a logical explanation. It's super important that you provide professional development to teachers, because our teachers don't know this information, but teachers get really excited when they have answers to their students' questions. And this comes back to the simple view of reading. When you teach an accurate systematic phonics, you provide students the decoding skills needed to read and comprehend at the same level they can listen and comprehend. And that is a powerful, powerful accomplishment. So how does reading in the brain work? It begins as a visual input. And when you see something and what you see is a letter, that letter activates what's called the letter box in the brain. This is a very highly trained region of the brain that says, hey, this is a letter. It says a sound. It is not the same region of the brain that is activated if you see a circle or a square, a shape that does not say a sound. The letter box is trained by learning letter-sound correspondences. There's tremendous amounts of research in neuroscience and other areas in the science of reading that show how to train the letter box by teaching the letter-sound correspondences. And what's exciting is the letter box then connects to that very region of the brain that the child was learning when they were learning to speak, the area that has coded the sounds of the language. And then it connects those sounds to the meaning in the same region that they use to listen and comprehend. So the neuroscience has now proven that the simple view of reading really works, and why it works to teach reading. I have a YouTube video that I'd like to show you from a school in South Carolina. And I think that I just wanted to share the voices of the principal, Dr. Martin, and one of their teachers, and their experiences teaching the science of reading in their school. And when they say logic of English, just replace that, please, with science of reading, because that's the point today, that you need to teach an accurate understanding of English. You need to teach strong phonemic awareness skills and strong decoding skills to get comprehension skills. But what I also want to have you listen to is just the story of the transformation that began to take place in their school.
I have seen a group of children that are presently my fourth grade students. Last year, those children were third graders. They were written off as being non-learners, non-readers. I've seen those children's attitudes elevated to the highest level. I don't have those discipline problems that I encountered last year with those children. I've not seen a single one of those children in my office this year except for embraces of hugs and signs of love. They're confident about their abilities to learn. I'm excited about what I've seen. Just that particular group of children have changed my total mindset about what logics of English can do for any child in any classroom, any school around this country.
Something that I've noticed in my classroom is I like to use the word pause, a pause in challenging behaviors and not feeling intimidated that they will not understand what it is that they're supposed to learn.
I have a particular fourth grade teacher and a particular fourth grade student that last year was almost a nightmare for my life. But I could not write him off. I would never write off any child. But what I've seen in this child this year makes tears come to anyone's eyes because he was not able to read anything last year. And now he's one of the better readers in that class. And I would love to have that opportunity for him to read for any person because he feels good about himself.
So this is the statistic I shared with you, or what I shared with you earlier, that the Reading League and other researchers are saying that when we teach the science of reading, 85% of students in the mainstream classroom can learn to read, another 10% with intervention. And I have dedicated my life to trying to make these massive changes in reading instruction, because for me, this is a matter of equity. It's a personal place. I imagine myself back on the Iron Range, and I imagine if I had been a struggling reader, I wouldn't have been able to achieve the dreams and the life that I have. We rely on our public schools. The public school educated me, and I believe all students should have access to this. And what shocked me as a parent was that this is the information that students pay $50 or $60 an hour for tutoring for when their parents can afford that. And I believe that how English works should be accessible to every student in our nation. Now, I have a few ideas if this presentation has sparked your interest. One place that you can learn a little bit more about what I've been sharing today is Emily Hanford has a documentary with American Public Media called What the Words Say. Go ahead and Google this. She talks about the simple view of reading. She talks about equity in education. This would be another great place for you to learn more about this important topic. Another place I referenced the work of the Reading League. The Reading League is a nonprofit that is working to advance this mission of bringing the science of reading to all students. And if you were interested in the rules that we were talking about today, I've provided a free coupon code here for the store.logicoфenglish.com. You can download the book Uncovering the Logic of English. This is all of the rules that explain English. And I want you to have access to this because I want people to see English differently. I believe this is one of the keys to changing reading education in the United States. And feel free to share this code with whoever you'd like. It is available through next week. And I just want to say thank you again for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Thank you so much. Team, I'm speechless, and you're probably just speechless as well, that this is the key for our children, all of our children, especially our boys. Because when you look at these scores, and Dr. Shaw showed us their scores over, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, yes, they've gone up, but still, most of our boys, most of our Black boys are not proficient readers, either in K through 8 or either in high school. So this will help not just our boys, but this will help our girls as well. Now, when I first invited Denise, I was saying, well, you probably would be best just presenting to our curriculum and instruction study group. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. Our teachers, they need to know how to be trained in this. And then Denise said, and this ties into the social emotional study group as well, because many times these boys' self-esteem, their behavior ties into what she said in her presentation about not knowing how to read and feeling bad about yourself and becoming a behavior problem for your teacher. So that's why I said, Denise, you've got to present, please, to all 3 study groups. And without missing a beat, she said, absolutely. So Denise, as well as Dr. Shaw, will be visiting each and every study group so you can have a chance to ask questions. Now, before we break into study groups, as I said earlier, we have the privilege of having our state board president, Clarence Crawford, here with us. Mr. Crawford, I know you have to leave, but before you leave, you please spend a few minutes and just sharing your heart with our task force. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene, and the presentation was excellent. We're talking not just about children in the grades. We're really talking about people for a lifetime. We're talking about what we do impacts people for a lifetime, and we can continue to do what we're doing. And as Dr. Shaw has demonstrated, we can look at 2% increase a year, and that's significant. But, and I know this is not a business, but if we were running a business and we saw these kind of numbers, and we're talking about a 2% increase, I can't think of a business around that would be pleased with the outcome. I can't think of a business around that would not be looking to introduce some kind of disruption into the process. Or maybe if you conclude that all you can do is do no better than you did last year, you'll probably get out of the business. So I'm very excited about this. I'm excited about what we're looking at. I'm particularly interested in where we can introduce disruption into the process and make a difference for children for a lifetime. So as we look at this, the thing I would ask you and have said before is, I appreciate all your hard work, but I'm really not interested in the study. I'm interested in the outcome. So as you start to look at this, and if you look at these ideas, what I'm interested in understanding is, what do we actually have to do to move this from a piece of paper to reality? So for those that are in education, those that are principals and administrators, think long and hard about what do we actually have to do to get this implemented. If you are a principal, what does the state board need to do to support you? What flexibilities do you need? What kind of air cover do you need? If you are a school board member, what do you need from us? What advocacy do you need from us to actually get something done? Yes, we have a lot of issues. We have the pandemic and all of that, and those are things that are there. But we should not use the pandemic as an excuse for not thinking big and then beginning to figure out how we make a difference, because we're really talking about making a difference in the lives of people for a lifetime. I suspect for me in high school, by the time high school, I have dyslexia, but back then no one ever called it dyslexia. So for me, by the time high school hit, a lot of it didn't make sense. I could very easily see myself in that group of young men. I was fortunate enough to finish high school, but it could have gone very easily the other way. For it, that by the time high school rolled around, it didn't make much sense anymore. Did not make much sense anymore. But I had great parents, and the Lord continued to send great mentors and people throughout my life that just sort of kept pushing me back until finally, the light went on. But I recognized that I was very fortunate in having that. So as we look at this and we think about what could be, I think we have to look and think about, practically what can we do, but I just encourage you to think big and then spend a lot of time thinking about how do we actually get it done. So there are a lot of good ideas, and I would imagine if we went around, we'd probably find tons and tons of great studies done by great and caring people at the end of the day, just sitting on some shelf somewhere. So for success for us and success for what we're trying to do at the state board is not studies, not reports, but actually trying to do things that make a difference in the lives of children. If that means we have to think outside of the box, that means that we have to take points of view, and that means that we have to lean forward in areas where we haven't done it before. And if it means we have to say things that make people feel uncomfortable, then that is what we will do. We have a great board. The board cares deeply about the children. And so let's not waste this pandemic. Let's use this pandemic to make some dramatic changes. So I encourage you. I look forward to hearing more. Anything that we can do on the state board, please let us know. Our focus is on outcomes, not on studies, not on processes, not on reports. How do we actually get stuff done? Success is, come September of 2021, we're going to be able to point to X number of schools, districts that are actually doing this. And then you think about what kind of air cover do you need to be able to start this in your school system, and what do you need to have to continue it. That means having to come in, if the board has to invite you to come in on a quarterly basis and report. Everybody in your system knows that quarterly you have to come in and report where you are to the board. That is exactly what we will do. So again, thank you very much, and wish you all a safe and enjoyable holiday season. Stay safe. And again, thank you so much for your work and for your dedication.
Vermelle.
Senator Baker.
Thank you very much. Denise, I have a question for you. Do you do any work like through PTAs or whatever with parents within this type of learning for the phonics and the rules? Because I suspect there are a lot of children that don't hear, they learn in school, but they may not hear the same thing at home. So it doesn't get reinforced, if that makes any sense. Is there anything available to help the parents help the children?
Yes. So we've put out a bunch of free resources ourselves. I can send to Dr. Greene a list of some free things. We have a free parent training. And we also have some free resources that all of your kids could use right away to learn the phonograms, and I do spelling analysis. So I can send those links if that's helpful to you. But I do want to follow up with this thought. The problem isn't just parents. The problem is we're not teaching this in our main classrooms. This is not part of our core curriculum. And what's really exciting to me is when we implement, when we see the science of reading implemented in mainstream classrooms, we see kids bringing that home and teaching their parents. We see them sharing it with their parents. So I really believe that this needs to start in our schools, and we need to put that emphasis that our teachers, also, by the way, our teachers are not trained in the science of reading. They didn't have to take phonetics classes. Most teachers don't know why there's an E in have. They teach it as a sight word because they don't know. And so we need to begin with good teacher instruction, not shaming our teachers. It's not their fault they don't know what they don't know. And I see teachers get really excited when they have answers that they've never had before, right? And they understand the language. So we need to start there. We need to empower our teachers and our parents. So
thank you, Denise. And Denise also will be visiting the individual study groups. But President Crawford, thank you so much for that encouragement. And you heard it from him that we are committed to making this work. And again, we don't want another fancy covered report to sit in someone's file cabinet. We want a how-to guide. So we're going to move into our study groups at this time. Again, I want to thank President Crawford and our other guests. Dr. Simpson, in her usual fashion, has made a wonderful suggestion. Dr. Shaw and Denise, you could do this. Dr. Shaw, if you would start first off with study group 1. And Denise, if you would start with study group 2. And then we do like a rotation. It's 10:20 now. So if you could perhaps start a rotation of maybe 15 minutes for each group. So Dr. Shaw going 1, 2, 3, and Denise going 2, 3, and then circling back to 1. And again, I want to thank you both, Dr. Shaw and Denise, for being here. Thank you, our guests. Thank you, everyone. I know that you're excited because if we can teach our boys reading, I've always taught my boys when I had my all boys school, boys, if you can learn to read, you can teach yourself anything else. You can teach yourself math. You can teach yourself social studies and history and science and anything else you want. So that's foundational. All right. So at this time, you all have your links to your study groups. You facilitators, you have principals who are going to be coming in. Denise, I just saw that you needed a link to study group 2. Dr. Goings, are you on?
Yeah, I'll send that in a second.
Okay, so he's going to send it to you to her email. Anything else, Dr. Shaw? You've got all 3 study groups, the links.
I think so. I definitely have 2 and 3. I'm looking for 1 right now.
And I can send that to Dr. Shaw.
Thank you.
And I just have one, if I can modify the suggestion that I made. I know that, and I wanted to be sensitive. There was one group in particular that requested Dr. Shaw's presence. And so I just wanted to suggest giving priority to that group for her to go there first. So I gave the example of her going to group 1, but I believe it was Dr. Howard who made the original request. So if we could modify that, and Dr. Shaw will start with group 3 and do 3, 2, 1, maybe, or 3, 1, like whichever to go.
Okay, you're gonna have to figure out now, Dr. Simpson. My mind is full. So
right. So Dr. Howard, and please chime in. Does that work for you? Again, I just wanted to be sensitive to that. I think that it was group 1 or 2 that also suggested or requested.
Group 3 and group 1.
Okay, so okay, that may be too confusing, but at least definitely starting with group.
How about this? I'm going to start in group 3.
Okay.
And Mia, just send me an email with a link and tell me when to switch.
Well, how about this? Go 3, 1, 2.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And Denise, if you would start with 1. 1, 1, 2, 3. And Dr. Shaw, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2. All right. That is our mental exercise for this morning. All right. Any other suggestions, comments? All right. And if anyone doesn't have a link to a certain study group, you can also text me and I have them as well. All right. Thank you all. And I want to take this time to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and see you in the new year. Happy New Year 2021. Goodbye 2020. Woo! Thank you all so much for all you do. Take care now. Is that Dr. Julius Davis still on?